60. Why don't we read the definition sheet first, which is just summarizing what he's saying here. Mario, on the definition sheet, do you want to read Anaxagoras, key principles, number 1?
There's Anaxagoras, key principles, intellect,
So it's just pronounced nous.
puts order into all things, divine time order, immaterial, unlimited, governable, theophanies, infinite seed, spermata, performance parts,
Homoimeres. So spermata just means seeds, and then meros means part, homoios means similar. Okay.
microscopic things, blood, wood, bone, etc. Replaces the four elements with countless kinds of uniform parts.
Right.
All sensible things are mixtures. Earth has a predominance
Good.
of parts of the earth, parts of earth, etc.
Okay, so now we're definitely back to the monotheism of Xenophanes. Right, something that wasn't there in Heraclitus or Empedocles. There, right, we have naturalism, right, and materialism. That it's just nature. So let's read on page 160, number 9, James, the bottom of the page.
160.
Yeah.
General principle.
Or number 9, fragment 1.
Since the great and the small share equally with respect to the number of parts they possess, here is a further reason why everything must possess a portion of everything else.
So see, there's a predominance, let's say, of the element. There's a predominance of the element water in like a cup of water. But he says, it goes so far as to say it also possesses a little bit of everything else. And in order to say that, he's also going to say basically that there's infinite divisibility. Remember we saw that Zeno, right, Zeno's paradoxes was using the idea of infinite divisibility. And so he just, now once again, he doesn't use that language, those two words, but he's basically agreeing with that. He's agreeing with the idea that, yeah, you can divide things up forever, as he's going to say.
Thus, nothing exists apart. Everything has a share of everything else. But since there is no smallest amount, it is impossible for a complete isolation to be brought about. And it is equally impossible for anything to come to be out of not being.
So if there's no smallest amount, he also says this in fragments 10 and 11, right? Fragment 11, smallness too was unlimited or infinite. So he agrees that there's infinite divisibility, but obviously he disagrees that that disproves motion. It just means that you can keep dividing things. Okay.
Accordingly, they must be now as they were in the beginning.
Right. So meaning there's no increase or decrease in the number of these homoimeres, these uniform parts. It's the same number, right? Nothing can come, something can't come from nothing, so they've just always been there, kind of being either joined or separated. Okay.
In everything, there is always a multiplicity of different ingredients, and there are as many ingredients separable from the lesser as there are ingredients separable from the greater.
Okay. So instead of there just being 4 elements, there's all these uniform parts. And then number 12, so actually, right, when I say they've always been joined and put together, there was a beginning where everything was together, like all the seeds were, I don't know, in some kind of big ball or something. And then the divine intellect introduced motion, and the motion is what made things separate out. So, like number 12, when all things were together before any separating had taken place, not even any color was discernible. So that's like the primordial beginning of everything. at the bottom of the page, all this variety of things was present in the original whole. So there is some kind of, just a big agglomerate of all things, all uniform parts.
So this prime mover and motion, if I recall, like on the soul, Aristotle talks about like the soul is the thing that moves animals and sentient
Correct,
things.
right.
Is he equating the prime mover with like a spiritual, like a soul, or the thing that the power that gives motion?
So certainly, as we're going to see, right, the into the divine intellect, the nous with the capital N, it's imparts motion, but a soul is immanent, and with the exception of the human intellect, and this divine mind is transcendent. So in that sense, it's not like a soul. However, Plato, we're going to see shortly, there's 3 periods in Plato, there's early, middle, and late. The late Plato does say that there's a world soul, and the soul does have the world does have a soul, the universe has a soul. So that's something that the late Plato will say. And then, we're not going to read that text in Plato, but we will talk about the late Plato when we get to the Green Plotinus book, because Plotinus also is going to follow that notion of a world soul.
We think of the soul as a spiritual entity, like a supernatural divine entity.
Right.
Did the Greeks? Is there that distinction with the Greeks that even though the soul is the thing, is the power or the thing that provides motion to material things, is it a material thing or is it a transcendent supernatural thing?
So you could see in Thales, it's not really clear, right? Like, because the matter has a soul, it didn't seem to be transcendent. Everything has a soul. Let's see, who else? The Milesians are materialists, so the soul for them is just, for Thales, the soul is made out of water. Heraclitus, the soul is made out of fire. And remember we saw Empedocles, it's made out of a combination of ether and fire. And so in book 1 of the De Anima, he goes through all of that. He goes through all the pre-Socratic versions of the soul. That's one reason I'm confident in saying that Empedocles did not believe in reincarnation, because he's very clear. I mean, he even talked about the soul dying. And so here, with Anaxagoras, mind, he doesn't talk about soul, interestingly. He just talks about mind. And he says, remember we read the text, some things have a share in mind. So humans have a share in something immaterial. And Plato is going to be very emphatic that the soul is immaterial. And then Aristotle is going to say, right, animals have souls that are not immaterial, and then humans have immaterial souls. So that's why I was saying, with the exception of the human intellect. Okay, so for Plato, it's more complicated because of reincarnation into animals. Did you follow? So if your soul, which is immaterial, can go into the soul of a cat or a dog, that means a cat or a dog is an immaterial soul, correct? Whereas for Aristotle rejects reincarnation. So for Aristotle, humans have an immaterial soul, and other animals have a soul that is corruptible. He doesn't call it a material soul because he doesn't want to say it's made out of like atoms or something like that. But it is corruptible. It dies with the body. Okay, but anyway, that's, yeah. We'll come back to that somewhat, especially, we'll come back to that with Aristotle. So we had already read number 7, right? And everything, there's a portion of everything else, the homoimeres, except of mind, right? Mind is transcendent, right? But in some things, there's mind also. So humans do have a transcendent mind. Okay, so we're the exception. And as far as I know, he never used the word soul, so he just doesn't address that, unless you notice him say it, but I don't remember him saying that. Okay, so let's get into mind. So the material principle is homoimeres, the uniform parts. This is a little bit like Heraclitus. Remember Heraclitus, the material principle is fire, but the kind of structural principle is process, change, right? Or logos, like laws of nature. And here, there's the material principles, uniform parts, but then the process, instead of it being, the explanation of change is not just a process like it was in Heraclitus. It's not love and strife like it was in Empedocles. It's this mind that's causing things to move, and that's, well, you understand. Right? That's why I call it a prime mover. I mean, he doesn't use that exact word, but it's very clear. Now, just so you know, There's, so Diels Krantz, I've never actually seen this book. I've been teaching the pre-Socratics for decades, but I've never actually seen the book. I should go to the library and just see if I could set my hands on that book. It's kind of a pity I've never seen it. But the Diels Krantz, fragmented there for Socratiker, right, German. The Germans are often pioneers when it comes to research. It seems like there's, I don't know, 5 times more books in German than any other language. Something about the culture there. So that was, what did it come out? I don't know. It came out 100 years ago, roughly. And so that's what contains these fragments. So they were the first people to ever combine the fragments. So that was like, I don't know, a great leap forward in ancient Greek philosophy, because now they combine the fragments. Because, right, these fragments from all over the place, as we can see with the testimonies, right? And so he has series B, which is the fragments, and then he has series A, which is the testimonies. So this is a small selection of what's in this Diels Krantz book. They were the editors, which is like 2 volumes. And I'm not sure, because I've never seen the book, but I think it translated into German, as I was mentioning. However, there is an English translation of the fragments into right, by someone named Kathleen Freeman, and it's actually quite a small book because the fragments aren't that voluminous. It's only about 100 pages, as you can see, right? The testimonies, that would be probably, I don't know, 300 pages, right? You can see the testimonies are much more voluminous, correct? But anyway, Kathleen Freeman, she follows the order in which Diels and Krantz put them. And just, you know, if you ever looked at her book, which you could probably buy online cheap, but the order, he changes the order, right? He changes the order of it, and it makes it a little bit harder to see the importance of mind. But whereas in the order that Diels Krantz puts them, it does bring out better kind of the role of mind. I mean, he does include the fragments, it's just that he puts them in a different order that I think makes it a little bit harder to see what's going on. So, do you see where it says, like, after each fragment has a little number in parentheses? Like, so we're going to read text, fragment 15 on page 162 next. See at the end of the paragraph it says 12. That's Diels Krantz 12. So it would be, the abbreviation would be, right, there's always abbreviations in philosophy, you know. So that would be DK B12, and then whatever the number of Anaxagoras is, I could guess, I don't know, let's say he's 15. So this is Diels Krantz, right, who are the first people to ever publish all these together. Then 15 would be Anaxagoras, B means it's a fragment, and then 12 means it's number 12. So the parenthesis 12, that's the official, because the Diels Krantz is the official. So just so you know, that if you ever see that, if you ever come across that, that's what that means. And okay, so you can see how they're not in order, right? 7, 5, 12, 14, 12, he's jumping around. He's even breaking up paragraphs, which is going a little bit far, in my opinion. It would have been better, maybe, but you can see, right, number 12 is there for 15 and for 17, so he split it into parts. So, okay, so let's read number 15. Who's next?
While other things have a share in the being of everything else, mind is unlimited, autonomous, and unmixed with anything, standing entirely by itself.
So this is what I'm saying. This is clearly transcendent, right? It's not uncommon sometimes for different intellectuals, especially like theologians, to kind of, they don't really necessarily understand ancient Greek philosophy very well, right? Because it's not really their topic. And so they'll make kind of sweeping statements like, well, the God of the ancient Greeks was immanent. Well, I mean, that's not really true, right? There are clear statements of transcendence. So instead of having the complicated way of distinguishing between, like, you know, let's say the Fathers of the Church and ancient Greek philosophy, they oversimplify. And so here you can see this is transcendent, right? Now, if you want to talk about the world soul being immanent, that's fine. The world soul is definitely immanent because, right, the whole idea of the soul. But that's Plato, right? We can't generalize what Plato says to everybody else. So, right, mind is unlimited. okay, we saw that characteristic in Xenophanes, right? Autonomous, unmixed with anything, standing entirely by itself. This is about as clear of a statement of transcendence as you could hope for. So see, also the pre-Socratics tend to get neglected. So you could see maybe someone who's a theologian, whether Protestant or Catholic, right? Maybe they've read a little bit of Plato and Aristotle, and so they've read some Plato at some point, a little bit, and so they remember hearing about the world soul, and so like, okay, well, the ancient Greeks had this idea of God as immanent, but you see what I mean? You can't just paint with a broad brush, or you can't just make a sweeping statement, right? A sweeping statement is a negative thing. A sweeping statement means you're not making distinctions that have to be made. So if you want to say that Plato's world soul was immanent, yes. If you want to say the ancient Greeks, right, there's not any, it's just not actually true, right? Okay, go ahead.
For if it were not by itself, but were mixed with anything else whatever, it would thereby participate in all that exists. Because, as I have said before, in everything that exists there is a share of everything else.
So notice too here, right? Another thing, so the reason I'm spending more time on him is this is very important, right, from the point of view of, remember what we read in Vatican I? What did Vatican I say about human reason and knowledge of God?
That you can obtain knowledge of God through reason alone, and that's the dogmatic belief of
Exactly. But prior to that, right, there was this idea that what did you have to have in order to know about God?
revelation.
Exactly. So the question then becomes, right, so let's just say, remember Father Antos was about contestation? That was contested before Vatican I. So there were various figures who were saying, no, you cannot know about God just based on reason. Aquinas had taught that you do need to, but they were disagreeing with that, right? Or maybe they hadn't read Aquinas, or maybe they disagree with Aquinas, who knows, right? And so, so that's why these texts are very important, because was Vatican I correct or not, right? Now, of course, you have to accept Vatican I if you want to get an authority appeal, which in theology you do, but in terms of philosophy, let's say, right? And so that's why, someone like Anaxagoras is very important, because is it true that you can know about God based on reason alone, right? Or is the God of the Greeks just this immanent being who's not really separate from the universe, right? Okay, that may be true for the Stoics, it may be true for the world soul of Plato, but we can't just read them all that way. So one thing, however, so that whole thing between faith and reason, even before Christ, right, in the ancient Jews encountered this problem. They knew about God based on revelation, but then the Greeks are talking about God based on reason. And so what they did was they came up with an idea that the Greeks had plagiarized, that the pagan is a negative term, okay? Pagan is not a positive term. It's a kind of a polemical term. I could explain the history of it, but just maybe you can tell that just by the word. Like, if you call someone a pagan, you're not complimenting them. Right? If I call them a polytheist, I'm kind of being neutral, right? So if I want to talk to a Hindu, I'd say, well, you're a polytheist. I wouldn't say you're a pagan. Not to the Hindu, because I want to help work with, I want to be pastoral. So anyway, so Aristobulus was a Jew, I should say, who, and he was the first one to introduce that about 160 BC. He said that the way that someone like Anaxagoras, if Anaxagoras is talking about God, it's because he plagiarized it from Moses. Do you follow? He stole it from Moses. If any of you guys are familiar with the fathers of the church, this is a very common theme. And then Augustine has this whole thing about we have to spoliate them back. We have to steal it back. So about the spoliation of the Egyptians. When they left Egypt, they had to take back from the Egyptians. They took all the gold of the Egyptians. But the idea was they were just taking back what had been taken from them. So Augustine uses that image. But it's not just Augustine. This is just very common amongst some of the fathers of the church, right? So just you see, that's why these texts are important. But just based on this, how could you, number 15 here, how could you reply to like Aristobulus, Tertullian, maybe Tertullian taught this, Tatian, even more so than Augustine. Tertullian was much stronger, right? Tertullian said, what hath Athens to do with Jerusalem? Philosophy and theology have nothing to do with each other. Pagan philosophy, and he just gets, he's like the Luther of the 200s AD Tertullian, right? But how could you reply to that accusation based on this? The idea that this is taken from Moses, the idea that, right? The only reason that he's saying this is because he's read. Maybe he hasn't even read it. Maybe he just met some Jews. They said there was some God. He was like, okay, I agree with that, and now he's not acknowledging it. That's what's called plagiarism, right? Because he's stealing. He's taking. You know what plagiarism is? Yeah.
So Anaxagoras is saying that mind, which I suppose is his concept of the transcendent
Right,
God,
exactly. Right.
So Anaxagoras is saying that it's unmixed with anything else, standing entirely by itself. But the Jewish conception of God is like he is being itself, like he is existence.
Okay, good, right. So I mean, his argument doesn't hinge on the same thing you find in Scripture, right? The argument just reflects his own thought. So it's clear that this argument is not based on Scripture. So there's, even if he had bumped into some Jew who said, we think there's one God, he'd be like, great, you agree with my philosophy, right? It's not that he's stealing ideas from them. Can you see that? Because does Scripture talk about homoimeres, right? See what I mean? Is Scripture philosophy? Is Scripture trying to understand the natural world? No, right? Scripture's not, it's not an exercise. The goal of Scripture is not to understand the natural world in the sense of how it functions, the processes, the elements. Of course, you understand the first cause of the natural world, but so you can see from what he says here, exactly, he's making an argument based on mixture because for him, everything, you can see it's in continuity with Thales. Is it just water? Is it just fire? Is it just air? Is it all four elements like Empedocles? This is 100% situated within this conversation. That's one, there's a textbook on history of philosophy, it's called The Great Conversation, which I think is kind of a good title for it. Because you can see we have a continuous conversation from Thales to Anaxagoras, right? It's an ongoing conversation. Well, is it just one element? Is it all four plus love and strife? No, it's uniform parts. He's flipping it around. And then it's mind, right? So to say that he's plagiarized, can you see how it's not plausible this is plagiarized from Scripture? Scripture doesn't even talk about these things, right? It's mythos versus logos, right? He reached this conclusion in a completely different way than Moses and the burning bush. Do you follow? Okay, because that's also a revelation. So it's not that he's stealing it, it's that he's just reaching it by reason. All right? So that's the thing. When you read the Fathers of the Church, you have to read them kind of in light of, ecumenical councils. So Vatican I is an ecumenical council, right? We can't just agree with Augustine the way that maybe you would agree with him in 400 AD. Because Vatican I said, you can know about God based on reason, right? So or maybe agree with Tertullian, because Augustine actually does grant that you can know about God based on reason. It's just, he has polemical texts, and then he has more conciliatory texts, right? So there's actually those two sides to Augustine. Tertullian, on the other hand, just is the Luther of, the 3rd century. Of course, Tertullian also died outside the Catholic Church, right? So he died, he's founded a sect called the Tertullianites. After himself. Okay, so do you see? So you want to focus, there's an argument here. It's not like they're stealing this idea from Moses and they're not acknowledging it, because it's 100% situated, and he's arguing, right? If it were not by itself, right, he's giving an argument. He's using reason, but we're mixed with anything else, it participates in everything that exists, because according to him, everything contains a bit of everything. So this is, you see, I don't want to belabor the point, but just to appreciate that. Do you follow? Because I've said before, in everything that exists, there's a share of everything else, right? His premises and his arguments come completely from his own philosophy of nature. And he's reasoning from philosophy of nature. Well, then mind, right? We experience our mind as somehow not like the rest of the world. It doesn't seem like our mind is made out of matter. It seems to have a different, consciousness has a different quality to it than material things do, let's say. And so therefore he's saying, well, there must be some divine mind building on Xenophanes, right? He moves everything by the thought of his mind, right? The same word we saw in Xenophanes. So this certainly goes back to Xenophanes, but right, what does Moses have to do with this? What does Exodus have to do with this? Basically nothing, right? Not that if he bumped into a Jew, I'm sure he'd be like, oh, good for you. You guys figured it out. I don't believe in the burning bush, but I do agree with your conclusion, so I'm glad there's someone out there.
So, does Anaxagoras posit then like a big crunch where there was this intellect, and then I guess these infinite seeds really like come out of the being, and then they've just become separate?
So he was clear that there was that whole, the original whole, but there doesn't seem to be a big crunch. Well, in 18, he talks about that.
Okay.
There isn't a big crunch in 18. So in that sense, he's disagreeing with Empedocles. So notice
Okay.
once again, right, it's a conversation. I mean, conversation is kind of minimizing it because you could just have a conversation about the weather. But it's a conversation in the sense that of like, it's a continuous conversation from Thales to, I don't know, Sartre in Western philosophy. Okay, so let's keep reading 15. Who was reading? Was it-
I was, okay. If mind were to share in the universal mixture, the things with which it was mixed would prevent it from having command over everything in the way that it does now.
Remember Xenophanes, he moves everything by the thought of his mind, right? That God is in charge of everything, he's in control of everything. Okay.
Whereas the truth is that mind, because of its exceptional fineness and purity, has knowledge of all that is, and therein it has the greatest power.
Okay, so also what knowledge of all that is, what would that be? Omniscience, so the omnipotent, moving everything, and then omniscience, has knowledge of everything. But see, we already saw those things in Xenophanes. So we might say, well, there's just a bunch of little fragments, it's poetic, come on, it doesn't really. But here we see there's a tradition, we have a very little bit of it, and there's actually, I'm sure, more of it that was lost, and next year we'll read something called the Divinity Papyrus, which was discovered in 1962, that also talks about some of these themes. So it shows you that we just have little bits of a broader monotheistic tradition, because in 1962 they discovered a fragment on someone's tomb, and when they were digging a foundation of building in Athens, that actually has similar ideas, that's anonymous. Right, so we don't, far from saying this is just the only element to this, but right, this has nothing to, this is not plagiarism, right? That's the Fideist way of dismissing the abilities of natural reason, because, right, of course, Luke did the whole thing about corruption and all that. But that idea of corruption is kind of there to tell him. Yeah.
Do we also, it looks like, might have like the principle of the oneness, or
Right.
of God being one, because he says the mind, not
Right, of
the
course,
minds.
Of course, yeah. No, he's agreeing with Xenophanes on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's not many gods. But it's, so he just calls it mind. Yeah. And even so, he did get in trouble. So he didn't deny, notice he's not denying Zeus. He's not attacking polytheism like Heraclitus did. Remember, Heraclitus is like crazy people talking to houses, like, he's like, they're just these crazy people. I don't know how I got away with that. I guess in Ephesus they weren't as strict about the laws, but Anaxagoras was exiled, and he basically had an unhappy end, unfortunately, because you see what I mean? Exile was considered a very harsh punishment in the ancient world.
So how close would he be to Xenophanes'
In time, you mean?
understanding of God?
Oh, he's just, so this is how traditions work, or how you have something that's kind of an initial statement that's blurry, and then it becomes clearer and more explicit.
Yeah.
So whereas Xenophanes, God is above the gods, so they're still talking about the gods. Well, now we're not even talking about the gods anymore.
Okay.
He doesn't talk about gods in the plural. He just talks about mind, but he doesn't even use the word God, and even so, he still got in trouble. He still was exiled. Let's see, who was reading? So having command over everything, and the way now, right? This is clear. Okay.
Okay, number 16.
Well, did you finish? I think whereas the truth.
I think we did.
I don't think.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas the truth is.
Whereas the truth is that mind, because of its exceptional fineness and purity, has knowledge of all that is, and therein it has the greatest power.
Right. So going back once again to Xenophanes, omniscience, and omnipotence. So there's no need to say that he invented this when we've already saw these ideas in Xenophanes. But you see how it clarifies Xenophanes. What was kind of implicit in Xenophanes is more clear here, if it wasn't clear enough. Number 17, brother.
All one, whether great or small, is alike. But of other things, nothing is quite like anything else.
Right, so remember, everything has a bit of everything. If our minds had a bit, were material, they'd have to be made out of homoinos, correct? And so all mind, whether great or small, the divine mind and our mind, they're not made out of little bits of everything else, of little homoinos. So, right, this is also the spiritual, you could say spiritual soul, he doesn't actually use that word, he just says spiritual mind of humans. Number 18, this is where there's not a big crunch. Okay.
And mind took charge of the cosmic situation, so that the universe proceeded to rotate from every beginning.
So this is why I'm calling him the prime mover, because he's that whatever sphere of all homoinos mixed together, he started to make it spin, and then I guess what we would now call centrifugal force, centrifugal meaning away from the center. Some centrifugal force caused things to then separate out into eventually planets and heavenly bodies, right? They didn't really know about stars versus planets back then. And they didn't have the accurate definition of them, obviously. And then eventually on the planets, life and so on. Okay.
At the first rotation, at the first rotation was small, but now it extends over a large space and will extend over a yet larger one.
So there, he doesn't talk about it crunching back together again. He just says it'll continue increasing, which is kind of interesting because anyone know about modern astronomy, what it says, Christians?
That all objects are expanding out from a center point forever.
Yeah, exactly. That we actually live in an expanding universe. That's it deals with the redshift. Distant bodies are redshifted in terms of astronomy. You could look it up online if you want to see the information. But the point is that, so once again, this incredible ability of the pre-Socratics to say things that either are incredibly primitive or incredibly up to date. Okay.
Both the things that are mingled and those that are separated and individuated are all known by mind.
Right. So so mind knows individuals, right? This is another important thing because, like I said, a lot of contemporary intellectuals or maybe theologians who don't really work on philosophy, right? Think about that. If you're a theologian, you're not a philosopher. Now, some people I actually do both. It just so happens, and I study both. So, but that's more the exception to the rule, right? Most philosophers don't know theology and vice versa. So, right? So they'll say, oh well, for the Greeks, God did not know individuals. Well, what did he just say? Right? No, the mind, this divine mind knows individuals. So see these sweeping statements that are made, maybe it's true for, I don't know, some Greek philosopher, like it's true for Alexander of Aphrodisias who lived in 200 AD, okay, but it's not true for all of them, it's not true for Anaxagoras. See, so the sweeping statements are often a way of just kind of getting rid of something, but it's not actually accounting for Greek philosophy, because Anaxagoras, right, is Greek philosopher. Okay.
And mind set in order all that was to be, all that ever was, but no longer is, and all that is now or ever will be.
So I think this is the first clear occurrence of the design argument, that the source of the order in the world that we see, right? We see, the water cycle, all these ecosystem. They didn't have those words, but obviously they could see that, right? They were living in nature really more than we tend to, right? With much less technology. And so God, the divine mind as a source of order, an intelligence, mind, nous, we could translate it intellect, intelligence, right? So the idea of intelligent design, this is the first clear occurrence of that, much more so than in Xenophanes, where it was kind of hinted at but not explicit. But this is a fairly explicit, right, kind of design argument. Now we jumped ahead and we had read Socrates make that argument, and he makes it even more explicit. But right, the idea of mind as a source of order, okay.
This includes the revolving movements of the stars, of the sun and moon, and of the air and aether as they are being separated off. It was the rotary movement that caused the separation, a separation of the dense from the rare, the hot from the cold, the bright from the dark, and and the dry from the moist.
So you can see centrifugal, right? Motion, number 20, Robert?
When mind first set things in motion, there began a process of separation in the moving mass. And as things were thus moving and separating, the process of separation was greatly increased by the rotary movement.
All right, so that's why I'm calling it the prime mover, first mover. The first cause of motion was mind. So it's divine mind as a prime mover. It's not just like a knower. Ricky?
The rotation and separation are characterized by force and swiftness. The swiftness makes the force. Such swiftness is not like the swiftness of anything known to us, but is incalculably greater.
I mean, that's true about astronomical speeds, if you guys know anything about that, and speeds at which things happen. Yeah.
So he's describing the motion, but why did it have to be a rotary movement? Why not an explosive movement, like, a fire? Or...
So he sees it as continuous with the fact that everything is rotating around the Earth. So you see the planets rotating through the sky, the sphere, the fixed stars is rotating, everything is rotating around us. And so it seems very orderly and peaceful, but he's saying it's going very fast. Because if you think about how far away, I guess he figured, if you just reason from like how far away they must be moving extremely fast. Also, the idea of force and swiftness, right? That the force it's still going, right? I think this is also kind of maybe the first inkling of inertial motion, right? That it's just moving by itself. Once he sets it in motion, it keeps moving. Because he says, right, the swiftness makes the force. Okay. Now, number 27, Matthew.
We should recognize the possibility that men may have been formed within the seeds, as well as other organisms that possess souls.
Okay, so this is where he does mention souls. I figured he probably mentioned it maybe somewhere. But the seeds are those uniform parts. Okay.
And that such men may perhaps dwell in cities and cultivate their fields just as we do, and that they have their sun and moon and other heavenly bodies as we do, and that their earth yields them vegetable life of all kinds, the most useful of which they harvest and take home to supply their needs. In other words, it may be that the separating and individuating process goes on not only in our own world, but elsewhere too.
So what's he talking about there?
Aliens.
Exactly, extraterrestrial life. Stuff that you might have thought came up in the 60s or the late 1800s with, like, I don't know, Jules Verne and something. Well, we're in 480 BC.
I hope that's on the test. That would be awesome.
So, I mean, it's sufficiently clear that's what he's talking about, right? There's other planets where life formed. Now, however, he does seem to have a more other organisms having souls. So this would give us a distinction between animal souls and then human minds. And I mean, what does this kind of sound like? Anybody? I mean, he doesn't mention God being involved here. So it's possible,
Kind of sounds like evolution.
right? It's possible that even though he's disagreeing with Empedocles on a lot of things, he's agreeing with him that the evolution, that nature is sufficient for things to kind of join together and form living things. At least the soul. Now, the human mind, on the other hand, would have to come from a divine mind. But so this would, if that's true, I'm not saying it's true because we just have this tiny fragment. But if that is true, that would make him the first theistic evolutionist, right? Remember, I talked about evolutionism. Evolutionism is meant to mean that they're holding evolution. I call it evolutionism because they're holding it no matter what you say. So Thomas Huxley, right, the Darwin's bulldog, held to atheistic evolutionism, meaning no matter what the counter arguments, right, consciousness is just like the steam on the freight train, and right, he's holding to evolution no matter what. But then theistic evolution is an idea that, well, evolution doesn't entail atheism or agnosticism, because you'd have, right, all these different varieties. You have pantheistic evolution, right? There's all these different varieties. but rather theistic evolutionism, right? And that's what, really, when I use the word evolutionism, I mean, well, I don't want to get into a big discussion, but I mean the not distinguishing between macroevolution and microevolution. That's why I use the word evolutionism. If we're talking about microevolution, that's not controversial, if you follow. That animals adapt to their environments over time is not controversial. Macroevolution is that the life sprang up spontaneously. And all we have is this paragraph, right? But if somehow the soul is formed spontaneously, like it was in Empedocles, right? Somehow the ether and the air got inside the body and made it alive. If the life can just form spontaneously, that's macroevolution, if you follow, meaning, correct? And so that would make him a theistic evolutionist, at least about the origin of life. Although it seems sufficiently clear that, right, the human mind, once it reached the point of humanity, then God would have given the mind. So it's not macroevolutionist in that sense, but it is in the sense that humans would have just come from other animals over time. The human body, at least. Okay? It's a pity we don't have more texts. But certainly we have traditional life, no question about that. Do you see how the way he sets it up? It may have been formed, it sounds like it's spontaneous. He doesn't say the mind may have formed life on other planets, correct? He just says it may have happened. So it seems like the mixing and mingling of these homoimeres can lead to that. And if you think of it this way, right, there's already little bits of blood and bone and everything, correct? So the little bits of blood and bone formed, coagulated on the planet Mars, and then it made, or no, little bits of, you understand, little animals and so on. You see? Yeah.
So in 15, he's engaging with reason, like a
Yeah.
logical procedure.
Yes.
In 27, he's looking. It looks like he's like, what is reasonableness or what is plausible, and it's not like a logical procession based on thinking. Did the ancient Greeks like accept both like reasonableness and reasoning as the same thing, and did they derive like certainty from both?
I mean, yeah, I mean, he is within his system. He's using reason for number 27, right? He's saying that if the little bits of blood and bone that are already there could coalesce on Earth and form little animals, and eventually bigger animals, and eventually humans, the human body, then that could have happened on other planets too. So I think he is using reason there, and you know, reason and reasonableness basically those two things go together. So within his system, for want of a better term, it's reasonable to think that life would have formed on other planets too, because there's already what are parts of plants? I don't know. Pith and bark. There's already little bits of pith and bark in the universe. If they form plant life here, they could have done it elsewhere. And so that's what would make it theistic evolutionism, that macroevolution does occur. Like God is not the one making the first living thing and putting a soul into it. It just happens naturally, and then he does give the mind, because remember he said mind is not like anything else. So the mind wouldn't come from the matter. It's not what's now called emergentism. Emergentism is the idea that your mind emerges from the matter. But okay, let's look at some of the other. So none of the testimonies talk about that really. They don't talk about the evolutionism thing, but they do talk about. Let's look at T3. So the other thing is this: it could be both and this is precisely what contemporary theistic evolutionists will say. They'll say it's not just evolution; it's also God planning on that. Do you follow? So he's definitely a theistic evolutionist. So it's not like mind disappears. It's just that mind is somehow knows that evolutionary process is going to occur. Do you follow? And so T3, for example, which is from actually Plato, right? So not long after he died, only maybe 50 years after Anaxagoras died. Who's next? T3.
I heard a man reading from a book, which he said was by a certain Anaxagoras, to the effect that mind arranges everything that occurs and is the cause of everything.
Okay. I don't know, T6.
Anaxagoras says that mind has absolute power, being mingled with nothing as it dispenses to everything, running through all time.
Right. So those certainly the prime mover, divine omnipotence, but then T4 would support the theistic evolutionism. Christian, T4.
On reading Anaxagoras' book, I perceive that he does not make any use of his concept of mind, nor does he appeal to it in explanation of how things are ordered, but he treats air, ether, and water as the causes.
Right, so that would be like that would be consistent with the macroevolution idea. There's little bits. Now he mentions air and water and so on, but there's little bits of blood and bone everywhere in the universe, including other planets. So they just kind of come together. And like a contemporary theistic evolutionist, he could say, well, God foresaw that, but it doesn't mean he's directly doing it. Whereas from the intelligent design perspective, like we saw with Socrates, God is directly doing it. That's the difference.
It's kind of like not a complete deism, but almost like things are already in motion. The mind intervenes when it needs to.
Only for the human soul. Only
Okay.
for the human mind.
Okay.
The mind only intervenes to give the human mind. Would be the scenario.
Okay.
Which is what contemporary theistic evolutionists, Christian, Jewish, whatever, that's what they say. They say it all happened on its own until the human mind came along, and then God has to give. Right? If you're Catholic, you do have to hold that. So, and I think Protestants would say the same thing, right? That God gives us, our soul doesn't emerge from matter or nothing. So exactly that. The objection here in T4 is kind of accusing. It's kind of saying he sounds a little bit deistic.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the clockmaker who just sets the clock in motion, and then all the things happen. He knew it was going to happen, but he just kind of is leaving it move on its own. And so and then notice Plato is criticizing him for that. Because Plato was a student of Socrates, and remember we saw in Xenophon, Socrates is very strong about the design argument, that God wanted it to be precisely like this, and he made it precisely like this. Like he has a much stronger view of providence. Okay, so you see that, yeah, that would definitely support the kind of theistic evolution idea. Let's go to page 167, T16. What is next? I think Timothy.
He says that all things are mixed together except mind, which alone is unmixed and free.
Okay, so if mind is free, what does that tell us about it? Is it this impersonal force?
Yeah.
Ezekiel?
No, because it's free. That's like a personable characteristic to it. It's not bound by any means.
Good, right. Does anybody, yeah.
Just to say, it's making choices, so there's obviously some kind of intelligence.
Right, I mean, is freedom and something impersonal, are those compatible? Something that's completely impersonal.
They're not compatible.
Is freedom a characteristic of personhood? Right. Is the AI a person?
No.
Is the AI free?
No.
Right? No. Is gravity free? Is it a person? No, right? Are amoebas free? No, they're not persons. So freedom and person go together. So that's the idea of a divine will, right? It's not just a mind that's knowing things, it's also free to do things. It chooses to do things. It chooses to give us souls, right? And maybe it or he, in that case you should really say he, right? The divine mind, he wants us to live a good life, right? Because Anaxagoras is gonna, right? He's agreeing with the others about, remember we saw idea of living ethically, we saw that with Xenophanes. Yeah.
So it basically ties in with the next ones that the divine will, mind willingly set into motion everything that was done. Like it purposefully did that instead of
Right.
just doing it.
Exactly. So that's very important, because another kind of the whole narrative, like I said, it's basically kind of a straw man. If imagine I'm a Protestant theologian, right? And I want to talk about the history of Christian theology. I say, well, here are these Greeks whose God was immanent, whose God wasn't free, whose God didn't know individuals, whose God didn't have providence over individuals. Do you follow? And then Revelation comes and shows that the Greeks are all wrong. Do you see how that's a very convenient narrative? But does anyone know what a straw man is?
So when you don't set your opponent's argument up to be the strongest, you set it up to be the weakest so that you can attack.
So in light of what we're reading here, do you see how that's basically a straw man argument? And what I'm doing is maybe I'm reducing it to the Stoics, at least certain Stoics who might talk about God that way, or more precisely, Alexander of Ephroditus, who I'm sure none of you have heard of. Alexander of Ephroditus does present God that way in 200 AD, right? But is he representative of the whole of Greek philosophy? No, right? So can you see how a Protestant theologian, he doesn't really actually want to do philosophy to begin with, because he's a fideist, because he's Protestant, so he knows that you can only know about God based on faith alone. And so that's a convenient straw man that I can then knock down and move on and say, see, everything is by faith alone. You follow? So you see, that's why I'm showing you how these things are important when it comes to kind of 20th century theology, broadly speaking, including Protestant. Because, right, remember, Protestant theology can influence Catholic theology. Scripture studies is largely influenced, very strong influence by Protestant scripture scholarship in the 19th century, right? That can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing, but it's good to be aware of it and, right, to be able to kind of judge or adjudicate. So yes, if it's free, if mind is free, then how could you say it's not a person or impersonal, right? But that's also kind of very common narrative. Oh, the ancient Greeks, they talked about God, sure, but it wasn't a personal God. Only Christians know about a personal God. Only the Bible tells us about a personal God. So what we're seeing here is where to draw the line between faith and reason. Now, what if someone would say, well, wait a minute, it looks like, what's the point of even having revelation? I mean, will anyone reply to that? Say, well, if the Greeks knew about a personal God based on reason alone, then what good is it to even have the Bible? They knew as much as we do. Anybody?
There's no way to understand or even logically reach the mystery of the Trinity.
Exactly. What other mysteries do they not know about?
The incarnation.
Right.
Sacraments.
Sacraments, grace,
Immaculate Conception.
all kinds of things. Our Christianity still kind of infinitely surpasses this. Right? It tells about the inner life of God himself. That's what the Trinity is. So in that sense, it infinitely surpasses just knowing that God is personal, right? To know that God is, his personhood is exercised in a triune way, like no one would ever dream of that. So our Catholicism still infinitely surpasses this, but we don't have to have a straw man of, well, they didn't have a personal God, but we do. Do you follow? Because if he's free, then that's personhood. Okay, let's see, who was reading? Number 17.
Anaxagoras says that when all things were together and had been at rest for an unlimited time, mind produced motion and caused separation.
Good. Matthew?
In taking mind as the first principle of motion, Anaxagoras rightly says that it is unaffected by anything else, and that it is the first principle of motion.
So what characteristic is that? That God does not change? Anyone know what that's called?
Was that simplicity?
Close. Simplicity would go with the transcendence. Immutability.
Oh.
So this is the divine immutability. So mutable means changeable. Immutability means unchangeability. This is the fact that God does not change, right? God is not affected by anything else. Nothing that happens on earth changes God. So this is all part of natural theology, as you can see. The divine immutability. This is what Aristotle calls God as unmoved mover. Even though he's moving everything, when I move something, right, I'm changed as I move things, right? Like I get tired, I'm using up energy, parts of my body are moving in relation to the other. When God, he somehow can move things without moving himself at all. He can change other things without himself being changed, right? What Aristotle calls unmoved mover in physics. But Plato's going to agree with this. Right? Plato's going to say God can't change. Right? He doesn't say it often. He might say it once in his whole corpus. But it's clear for Plato too, right? God. So this is going to be important going forward. Whereas an immanent God would change, right? Okay, Peter?
For only thus, by being unmoved, can it cause motion and everything else. And by being unmixed, it can rule.
So you can see the unmoved mover idea, really, Aristotle did not invent that. Once again, the kind of sweeping narrative is Aristotle invented the unmoved mover. Aristotle discovered the mover. Well, no. I mean, what more could you ask for? It has the word unmoved on page 168. Anaxagoras is the one who discovered the unmoved mover, right? This is, yeah, again. Is it? Yeah. Okay. T19 is the same thing. Mind does not change. Divine immutability, right? Has nothing in common with anything else. Divine transcendence. T20, it must, in order to rule, it has to acknowledge of what is ruling, what it is ruling, that's divine providence over individuals. It must have essential knowledge of all things, divine omniscience. And, okay, so as much as we like that, we'll, for next time, we'll move on to atomism.